Up, peeps? Make sure that you all can hear me correctly. We're going to do our shout outs for the day. Let me know when you're here. We're going to get started in like 5 minutes. Yeah, I know I got to do my daily shout outs. 1 second. Motherfucker. Sorry, I'm trying to share the video. Make sure y'all share it if you have not already. Alright. Alright, let's go through these shout outs. Google Science. Hi, how are you? What's going on? Wilhelm Rumpenshire. That almost sounds like a made-up name. That's a dope name. Your parents put in a lot of effort to make sure that your name sounded like the perfect character in a movie. Like, probably like a Lord of the Rings movie. Or a Harry Potter movie. Brett Fairchild. Hey man, I'm 20 and interested in getting into activism, running and live in Tampa, but I'm in Boston for music school. Any tips? Yeah, sure. When you get back to South Florida, let me know. I'm always down to help out with the activism. Mm-mm-mm. I say they're just not gonna alert anybody that we live today, huh? The call from New Hampshire. You should visit the primary for the primaries. It's a jungle up here with all the candidates already. I keep hearing that. I might go up there. I keep hearing that it's crazy. Keep hearing that. Hot. I forgot I did that. Brett Fairchild. Oh man, I'm glad. I'm glad. That's the goal ultimately. Have a great day as well. All right, people, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Hopefully, more people will come in as the video progresses. Make sure you like and share the video. And yeah, we'll go ahead and get started. Jason V, there ain't gonna be no notifications today. Apparently, they're skimping on notifications. What a surprise! So, what is going on, everybody? Thank you all so much for tuning into this live stream segment of Mikasa Sukasa, and I'm, of course, as always, your humble host, Nico House. Now, this morning, literally at 6:45 a.m., the New York Times has decided to release an article on Bernie Sanders. Now, I haven't read it yet. For things like this, I like having y'all around with me, because I need to make sure when I read something, I'm not crazy. So we do these live reaction videos to make sure that I'm reacting the way you should be reacting, the way that everybody should be reacting, just in case somebody perceives my reaction as crazy and y'all perceive my reaction as reality, because I trust y'all's reaction to my reaction more than I trust the establishment reaction to my reaction, because they're just reactionary, if we're being honest. I don't think I lost anybody there, but you can go back and watch the replay if you missed that. So with that being said, people, the title of this article is what got me a little worried, because I'm aware. The title says, well, look, I'll tell you what the title says. The title says, Bernie Sanders wants to change America, but he may have to change himself first. I don't really trust the title like that coming from a mainstream news source, because I feel like that argument is not being made in good faith. I'm not saying that Bernie Sanders does not need any improvements made to himself, but I do understand this. Being who he is today is what got us this far in the revolution that we've experienced in this country. Informational revolution, progressive grassroots revolution that we've been seeing. So when the establishment is arguing that he needs to change, not really sure how that's going to go. I don't know if they're making this argument in good faith. I don't know if they're making it in bad faith. I don't know if they're cheering for him. I don't know if they're smearing him. The author's name is Anand Giriharadis. I don't know what origin that name is, but I hope I didn't butcher it too bad. And so we're going to find out. Like I said, this article is brand new, just came out today. And so let's see what the New York Times has to say about Bernie freaking Sanders. So, like I said, it says Bernie Sanders wants to change America, but he may have to change himself first. This has got a really good picture of him, man. Look, Bernie looking on point for an 80-year-old. He is holding on to that hair. It is not going anywhere. Some people bald and it's a continual pattern of baldness. And Bernie has had the exact same amount of hair since he was 30. It's really impressive. I'm not gonna lie. If I was going bald and then my hair just stopped balding, I would accept it too. That's a talent if you ask me. Anyway, Bernie Sanders wants to make a joke. That's the start of the article. Pretty good joke, he thinks. He is slumped in a window seat in coach on a plane parked at Chicago O'Hare. He has about an hour in transit to get the joke into his next speech. Before deplaning, he pulls his hair forward, but only on the left, the side one may call Bernie, as opposed to the more combed right hemisphere, Senator Sanders. Let's see what they did right there. Off the plane, the selfie requests start. Okay, but quickly. Okay, why not? Sure. Oh, was that a macaroni grill and we want to go in and get a pizza with them? Sausage pizza. Okay, then selfies with the kitchen staff. Good people, hardworking people, his people. His speech for tonight is ready, but Sanders wants to scrap the planned opening for his pretty good joke. Does Terrell Champion, his body man, who has mastered the art of knowing when to talk to the senator and when to leave him be, have the printer? Of course, last minute checks about tonight, RSVPs, good shape, better than early 2015 when barely anyone knew him. A woman at the gate wants a selfie, but Sanders is fixated on the printout of the joke. 1 minute, he barks. He loves the people. People can be trickier. Okay. I'm not. That was a really weird buildup. I hope this is going somewhere. The junior senator from Vermont flies. The junior senator from Vermont. I'm assuming this might be a reference to his old. I mean, we're not calling Senator Sanders a junior, still. So we're gonna find out. But I don't like that. I don't like that. Don't be minimizing Burn, man. Burn got time in. If there is anybody that has ever been a senior as a senator, Bernie would be in that category. But the article says the junior senator from Vermont flies over the country he aspires to govern, with its crop circles and caterpillar-shaped suburbs and community pools and rail yards full of shipping containers. Soon his silver SUV is rolling through Davenport, Iowa, past a brick building with a sign for German mustard and a soon-to-open hookah bar. The election is a year and a half out, but the crowd at the venue is feverish. Men in boots just off shift, young people who may not work in the gig economy, or who may or may not work in the gig economy, and listen to the podcast Chapo's Trap House. A woman in a purple nurse's uniform, beefy guys in Trump Lowell camo. I don't ask me what that means. He takes the stage and tosses off his blazer. He is taller in real life than on television. It's true. I think Bernie's maybe an inch shorter than me. Maybe not even that much. Though he shrinks by stooping. His cuffs aren't carefully folded once or twice, a la farm stay casual, but rather jammed up his forearm. Before I get into my remarks here in Davenport, he begins, I did want to make a few comments, but now instead of just launching the joke he worked so hard to print out, he first warns him about it. I wanted to tell you, I'm being funny here, so don't get excited. That I was a little bit apprehensive about coming back to Iowa. He reminds them of how President Trump had falsely linked wind turbines, which are ubiquitous in Iowa, to cancer. So I was sitting here wondering, he says, if I come to Iowa and I and my staff going to get cancer. That's actually a funny joke. I mean, it's political. It's based off of the nonsensical quote of Trump. And actually, I think it's pretty funny. It's like, because it's ridiculous to assert that someone is going to get cancer from wind turbines where there is no evidence suggesting such. So let's continue. I think I know where this article is headed. Oh, real quick before I go into that, let me see if there's any super chats. Nope, we're good. I am 6'1". Just for your information. I caught it. Running for president is like doing stand-up. You try bits, you see what sticks. The room liked it, so the next morning, the joke resurfaced in Muscatine. Again, with a warning, because Sanders, who can be funny unintentionally, is making an effort at some of the performative aspects of politics he has long sneered at. I told a funny joke yesterday. He says to the crowd. Oh, man. The article is right about one thing. Bernie does it. Bernie actually can be intentionally funny. He's done. I've seen him make some pretty funny jokes at some of his speeches. But he is more so, in my opinion, accidentally funny. And he's more funny when he's accidentally funny. Like he gets a huge laugh from a joke that he told at another rally. Then he goes to the next rally and was like, hey, y'all, I told a funny joke yesterday. I'm going to tell it to y'all, too, just to make sure that it's funny. Oh, man. He said, I try. I don't have the world's greatest sense of humor. You don't say, Bernie. Several hours later, in Fairfield, he tries it again. Takes another day for Sanders to offer the joke without advance notice. On the way out of Oskaloosa, wind turbines appear. A viral video opportunity, this SUV carrying Sanders, the staff van, and the luggage-bearing minivan all swerved to the side of US 63. Sanders, with a few aides, prepares to cross the two-lane highway. Be careful, he yells. It's the kind of old-world survivalist carrying Sanders is capable of in public. Don't die. Have you eaten? Remember your luggage. Don't leave your charger. Now the senator, 77, stands before the wind farm in his gold button blazer and slacks, looking like a traveling Rotary Club speaker, facing a cameraman in yellow skinny jeans who looks young enough to be his grandson. He improvises theoretically throwing his hands over his ears as if protecting himself from the allegedly carcinogenic turbine sound. Oh, that noise, he cries. I can't think. He takes his hands down. Just kidding. There's no noise. He moves to a more serious riff. The opener is funny, but his video team finds it gimmicky, so they cut it. Sanders ran for office in 1972, campaigning for an open Vermont seat on the Liberty Union Party ticket. He lost, attracting 2% of the vote. One of his opponents was a Democratic state representative named Randolph Major. As Senator Sanders recalls in a memoir, Major invented a brilliant publicity gimmick, skiing around the state to meet voters. Sanders later complained, "Here I was giving long-winded statements to a bored media about the major problems facing humanity, and the TV cameras were literally focused on Randy's blisters." Sanders was 31. He was, even as a young man, an old man. See, they got that part right. I be saying all the time, man, Sanders been old forever. You know, ain't no wrong with it. He's been a very wise man at a very young age. Part of the reason why he's so hard-headed now. It's one of the most endearing qualities about him, and is, you know, I'm sure that he could stand to loosen up at times, and I think that a lot of people feel that he has actually loosened up. From the people that I've talked to in his rallies, the way I've seen him engaging in with media, it seems like he's actually loosened up a lot. Not only that, but he's been more accepting of narratives that counter his conventional wisdom and understanding of how politics works. When he came out and said that Venezuela is not a dictatorship, and in that it should not be the United States giving aid to the Venezuelan people. We should allow the international community to handle it, and we should allow them to handle it, and we should stay out of it. That is a line that he had not really said before, and it shows that he is growing, and I think that he is a little bit more open to receiving critiques, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. So with that being said, let's continue. Now, nearly half a century later, he is an old man who enraptures the young. The senator who once rejected gimmicks and complained that modern American politics is about image and technique, now scripts jokes. I think they meant scripted jokes, and asks after his Twitter likes. He's pretty much the same man that he has always been, but he's determined to take advantage of being one of the more improbable top-tiered presidential candidates in American history. That's weird. Improbable top tier. You think that like Biden or Kamala has been described as an improbable top tier? What if you're top tier? I feel like that's antithetical to improbability. Like, oh, it's improbable that he'll win based off of what? Because we don't want him to win. That's basically what it is. So, let's continue. And when Sanders ran for president in 2016, it was because he felt important ideas were unrepresented. Many of his positions were dismissed as radical, vague, and wide-eyed. Yet, as the 2020 race gathers intensity, much of the Sanders program has become de rigueur. Don't ask me what that means. For progressives and centrist Democrats alike. Single-payer health care, massively subsidized college education, a 15% minimum wage, a federal jobs program. Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey supports some form of Medicare for all. Ain't no such thing as some form of Medicare for all. We got some form of Medicare for all right now. How many people got all of it? Got any of it? And not all of us. All of us ain't got some form of Medicare for all, but some form of Medicare for all exists. I don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear that. With that being said, let's continue. Former Vice President Joe Biden recently embraced a $15 minimum wage. The idea of federally provided jobs, evocative of the New Deal, has gone from being a far-out Sanders talking point to an idea that has more moderate adherents, like Senators Kamala Harris from California and Kirsten Gillibrand of New York. During 8 days on the campaign trail with Sanders this spring, I heard one refrain as much as any other. A funny thing had happened since 2016, and Sanders' ideas were no longer radical. They were never radical, by the way. Brothers and sisters, we should be enormously proud. Oh, can I do it in the Brothers and sisters, we should be enormously proud that we have come such a long way in transforming American politics over the last 4 years. He told the crowd one sunny April afternoon. And I've been working on my Sanders impression, y'all. I'm pretty good at the Trump impression. I got to get my Sanders impression down. Sanders has changed the debate in great measure because he's never really changed himself. His consistency is a selling point. That is literally the truest thing ever. Even in situations where he's been inconsistent, right? And they're few and far between compared to the rest of the establishment. But the image of his consistency even has been his selling point. The image of his consistency has actually been a main defense of him. Whenever people are comparing records, and for example, if his record is compared to Tulsi Gabbard's, over the last maybe 3 to 4 years, which is obvious because it would obviously happen because they're both running for president, there's nothing wrong with that. But when it's compared, most people, if there is, like, for example, people had issues with his Russiagate rhetoric or his Syria rhetoric, or initially his rhetoric on Venezuela. The main defense of him is that he's been consistently anti-war, and therefore we should be we should have less trepidation about whether or not we believe him. And there's a legitimate argument to be made that that's true. I don't believe that Sanders will be launching us into major warfare anytime soon if he wins. And so it is the consistency of speaking out against regime change wars, at least the major ones, is good, or at least the image of that consistency. But they are correct that it's been one of his main selling points. His mantras against billionaires stealing the American dream, the system being rigged, working people needing to form movement to take power back. And yet he is now running against nearly 24 competitors. No. Y'all got it twisted. Sanders ain't running against them. Sanders is only running against himself. It is, and once again, as a Tulsi Gabbard supporter, y'all know how I feel about this. I'm under no disillusion as to what Bernie Sanders has created. It is literally Bernie and everybody else at this point. Maybe that will change after the debates. But at this very moment, it is Bernie versus Bernie here. Everybody else, $17, $18 million behind. And a million volunteers short, okay? These are the facts. So, they say that many of these candidates have chipped away at his distinctiveness by emulating his stances, and just being Bernie Sanders may not get the job done. I think that's ludicrous. I don't think that people have chipped away at his distinctiveness. The ones who are actually polling, quote unquote, closest to Bernie have taken an opposite approach. Biden has tried to separate himself as being clearly more conservative. Buttigieg has maintained the platitude attitude. As in, we're not going to talk policy at all, even though Bernie always talks policies. I think the only one who is somewhat chipped at his distinctiveness, I think Tulsi has created her own lane, but the only one who's chipped at his distinctiveness is Elizabeth Warren, because she's even convinced some progressives that she is progressive. And I don't think that that's the case. And you know how I feel about this. So, but other than that, everybody has been emulating Bernie, but then they get exposed like the next day. They thought that to be true of Beto in the beginning. They thought it to be true of Beto. Look how that turned out. I'm gonna tell you, I was at the Democratic convention in California. Those Beto supporters were looking mighty sad. There was about 4 of them there. It looked like they were just exchanging shirts with each other, like different shirts with each other, so it'll make it look like there were more Beto supporters there than there was. But I heard 0 people mention his speech. So they tried that with Beto. Beto wanted to try and emulate being a young Bernie Sanders. Didn't work out. Kamala, they tried to make her the black Bernie Sanders, the black woman Bernie Sanders. Didn't work out. They're trying to make Elizabeth Warren the Hillary light Bernie Sanders, and I don't think that's going to work out either. But they are correct about one thing. He is not changed. And I think that the only thing, I don't think Bernie should change. I think that he should improve and double down on his principles in a lot of ways. I don't think he needs to change for anybody. That's literally what got him here. We love the rough, tough coach flying, selfies with the people. We love that Bernie. And I don't think that should change. Sanders is solidly in second place. No, he's not in second place. He's not in second place behind Biden. I'm not going to say that. I am going to say. I'm going to say it every day of the week that I have to. He's not in second place behind Biden. I don't give a damn what national polls say. I don't give a damn what state polls say. I guarantee if we took internal polling from Democrats, it likely says that that Bernie has a huge lead over Biden, and they are switching the numbers because they've done this before. I remember, like I said, February 2017 or 2018. I'm telling you, I got an internal poll that said that that Trump was way more popular than what the Democrats wanted to pretend, according to their internal polling. And when that internal polling eventually released, damn near 10 months later, it was about 10 months, it was in October, then everybody believed me. Because they were switching the numbers of approval based off of and manipulating the numbers to make it look like it was the opposite. And it's basically what we're seeing here. Like I said, that's why I believe that based off of everything that I've seen, that Tulsi and Warren are more likely tied. And that's why they've been going extra hard after Tulsi and been trying to boost Warren to convince us otherwise. So they're saying that just being Bernie may not get the job done. I agree. It needs to be Bernie plus times 2. That's what I think. Sanders is solidly in second place behind Joe Biden. Not true. And while the movement he built in 2016 is proven durable, there are a few signs that it's growing. Let's hear their justification for this statement. This is Time magazine with Bernie on the cover. Let's see if they do some legitimate analytical work. Between March and May, according to a national survey by Mammoth University, Sanders' support dropped by 25% of likely Democratic votes and 15% as several rivals increased their share. Okay? So what do you... Hold on. So basically, likely Democratic voters, the Democratic Party. You telling me that Democratic Party people, they don't necessarily like, but I don't get. When you say his support drop, what do you mean? That's what I'm trying to understand. Like, Democrats, by the way, love Bernie overall. However, or at least they view him favorably. However, when you say his support drops, I've seen the way these polls ask questions. It doesn't necessarily translate to the numbers that they push out. They manipulate the questions and manipulate how you are supposed to answer them. The only one that I could see taking a fair share of his support would be Warren. Well, excuse me, not Warren. Would be Tulsi. And that's not saying that the majority of them don't support Bernie. So that would be a misnomer. But in all likelihood, they don't ask you, who do you support? They probably ask, who do you most support? But whatever. I love the analysis of this, though, right? We're going to base this very broad and general statement that is almost inflammatory to say on nothing but a poll talking about likely Democratic voters. And We're not going to consider independents. We're not going to tell you what age they were. We're not going to talk about demographics. Nor will we talk about the fact that, like, 36? I want to say 36 states are open, semi-open primaries. In other words, a lot of those people will be looking for another option outside of Donald Trump. A lot of those people will be voting independent again, or at least voting from an independent perspective again. You know what that means? That means that likely Democratic voters will not be determining the outcome of this election. Independent voters, independent-minded voters will be determining the outcome of this election. And given how many individual donors Bernie has compared to the other candidates gaining support, given that people like Bates have had to drop out because his numbers have actually dropped, given the superstar status that I witnessed in California for Bernie, and I mean that we continue to witness across the country, everywhere he goes, pretending as if his support has dropped is laughable. He has 1 million volunteers. 1 million. I don't think y'all really understand how 1 million is a lot. 1 million. So his support dropped, but by this time last year, he had probably 1/3 or 1/4 of the amount of volunteers that he has right now, and he hasn't even debated anybody yet. So it's silly. This is a silly claim. But let's go on and see what their justification is for this poor analytics. There is a feeling in Sanders' orbit that he will in certain ways have to evolve if he wants to do more than change the conversation. Okay, let's see what they have to say about this. He has to tell his story more. Do they ever go to any of his events? Because I'm pretty sure he does tell his story often. Navigate the shoals of racial and gender politics with greater awareness of contemporary expectation and its own blind spots. I think that that's an okay statement to make, but I just don't believe it's being made in good faith. I think it's being made based off of assertions from the mainstream, not from reality. There are blind spots that Bernie Sanders has, but notice once again that this argument is very rarely made when it comes to even Kamala. Kamala has racial blind spots. What she thinks is what black people want is like a caricature of what a black person would want. Like, she doesn't actually understand this. She has a racial blind spot, but it's never really discussed with Kamala, in my opinion. Bethlehem Test Faith. Thanks, Bethlehem. Appreciate the super chat. Excited to. I know. I'm surprised that you eventually got the notification. Probably did not. You probably just came here and saw it. But, yeah. I don't. Thanks for the super chat though. But and by the way, happy birthday, Bethlehem. Her birthday was a few days ago. I'm pretty sure she's like 23 or something like that. And so I want to wish her a happy birthday. So yeah, I don't know if it's being genuine. I don't know if it's an argument being made in good faith or bad faith. He does have blind spots, but until I start seeing consistently other candidates address and being asked to address their racial blind spots, their expectations, then I can't take seriously the claim that Bernie Sanders is somehow unique in this regard by the mainstream. He's to overcome his self-image of being a solitary outsider, alone, unheard, disrespected, and cultivate allies. Are you kidding me? He's already been cultivating allies and it's been pissing everybody off. If he has lost support along the way, it's because he's allied in some instances with people like Warren, because he's allied in some instances with people like Booker, because he hasn't been as stern in his integrity of the people he's associated with as he has been with the integrity of some of the policies that he pushes. That has been one of the main problems with Bernie. I mean, that his supporters have had with him. But to pretend as if Bernie is somehow like not about building allies when the man has worked with people both in the Democratic Party in the Democratic caucus and in the Republican Party to get legislation amendments passed across the board, it's ludicrous. If they're trying to assert this idea that Bernie should, play nicer, even nicer than he already has with the establishment, then once again, I would fervently disagree. And that would be, in my opinion, a demonstration that they have no idea how electoral politics works and what they are dealing with in 2019. It's one thing to talk about your 20 to 25%. Excuse me. It's one thing to talk to your 20% to 25%. Who are your core believers? But we've got to work on persuading people into the fold. Faiz Shakir, Sanders' campaign manager, told me. And that's why it takes, I believe, a continual evolution of the message. Freshening up the message and also sharing more about him. I'm not going to be mad at sharing more about him. But the message, Bernie has just been really on point with the message. He's always on message. He's always on point. And I just really feel like, and this isn't, I don't think this was by his doing. It happened actually organically. To pretend that people don't know Bernie's story, I just feel like it's laughable. And I agree. We always want to bring more people into the fold, and we always want to evolve. But I just truly believe that this article is not making an argument in good faith in the ways that Bernie should evolve. Bernie should be more left of what he is right now. Like, for example, Bernie should have spoke out on Assange before when he got arrested the first time, not after the mainstream okays it, basically, by defending Assange, at least in that, from the perspective of protecting freedom of the press. He should not have ever voted for the sanctions, nor should he have pushed them and advocated for them, for the sanctions against Russia, because we ended up finding out that a lot of what was going on was BS. And so he trusted the judgment of the military intelligence community. I use intelligence very loosely, and he got it wrong there. So he needs to evolve in his intuition. He needs to evolve in his ability, and what I believe is his abilities, or sometimes lack thereof, to be a little bit more malleable when it comes to his personal approach to solving something. It's not that he is wrong at times, but it's just the way he goes about it doesn't allow for much pushback from the people being affected by certain issues. In my humble opinion, that's a critique. It's not like he's still great when it comes to policy. And the Sanders Institute itself allowed for a lot of conversation and engagement on the issues on how to best go about solving them. But I'm saying from a personally, that's one of the things I think he can evolve on. But once again, I just don't think that this article is making these assessments in good faith. Changing the conversation isn't nothing. William Jennings Bryan, 3 times the Democratic Party nominee for president, changed the conversation. Eugene Debs, 5 times the Socialist Party nominee, changed the conversation. George McGovern, who lost 49 states to Richard Nixon in 1972, really changed the conversation. They had to say that, and by the way, that was after being smeared. But activists and prophets seldom earn a chance to end up in command of the 4th Infantry Division or sit knees to knees with Vladimir Putin. Okay. And they are right. There's a legitimate argument to make that would have once upon been the case. But we're kind of in a different world. And Ray McGovern was undercut and cheated. Unfortunately, Jimmy Carter was a part of that. One of the very few blunders on his record. But let's be very clear about something. Ray McGovern didn't have 1 million volunteers. Ray McGovern didn't have close to $17 million in his bank account to just smack the establishment with. Ray McGovern didn't have social media. Ray McGovern didn't have an army of sycophants. I mean, an army. I don't want to say sycophants because some of them are sycophants, but like it's kind of sycophantic. The loyalty to Bernie is insane. Thanks for the super chat, Patrick. Do you think he'll come out with anything more specific for black people Something. What I don't want him to come out with something more specific for black people. You know what I want him to do? I want Bernie to listen to black people. Does that make sense? My biggest, if I have a gripe with Bernie, it is only, well, not only, the main one from the perspective, like a personal perspective, as a minority, as a black man, is that when he is being asked about black issues, I feel like he has a tendency to just want to be right, want to get the answer right. You get what I'm saying? Not that he has it wrong necessarily, but at a certain point, you kind of have to sit back and say, hold on, why do I have to have the answer for this? Well, you know what? How about this? I don't actually have the answers. And what I want to do is bring black people from all different backgrounds, socioeconomic, academia, people from the hood, and include them in the conversation. Bring them to the table, literally hire people. Bring them to the table, work specifically on black policies and how, and how policies could potentially impact the black community, and say, I don't have the answers, but you do. And so I will be taking your guidance throughout my entire presidency. That is the only way that Bernie can win that argument. And it's hard for him to see that, but it's because he's been on the right side of history so often, and he has been an activist. And that is and he's a genuine, full-blown activist. But it's like when you have conversations with the black, like if you're in a BLM meeting or just a Black Panther meeting even. There are some times when you're talking about, there are leaders within Black Panthers that were white, by the way. But when it came to the issues, because there was a lot of things that the Black Panthers did, child care services, gun classes, self-sustaining economies. But when it was time to deal with black issues specifically, black people were the ones who had the seat at the table because they understood what they were dealing with every day. So like, it takes more than academia at times. Sometimes it's the same thing I feel about with women's issues. You have women from different backgrounds, all of them have a seat at the table, and you let them guide you on how to make sure that their needs are being adhered to. Because that's what it's going to take. All of us sitting down at the table and having a conversation. So it's not like Bernie has gotten it wrong. He did get it wrong on reparations, not because him saying he's against reparations, but because of his logic. His logic is kind of inconsistent when it comes to reparations, and it doesn't match up with the facts. So I would have loved to hear him say, you know what, I don't know if reparations is the right thing to do, but I'm going to have people sit down and talk to me about it so I can make sure that I get the right answer. So, yeah. And he doesn't really have people in his campaign to give him the right answer on that. The one person I know that boldly supports reparations is a black person, and they have not managed to change Bernie's mind yet, even though it's one of his most trusted confidants. So hopefully that will be a part of his evolution, is learning when to figure out that you don't always have to have a solution ready. Sometimes it's better to say, I don't have the answer, but I really want to work together with the people affected to get the right answer. So, yeah. Yes, Sanders has already changed the game. The question lingering over him is, to win the game, can he change? Feel the pain. If the keyword of Bernie 2016, if the keyword of Bernie 2016 was rigged, Bernie 2020 is about pain. It is a campaign about stress and anxiety, about tens of millions of people suffering alone, together. I traveled some 6,000 miles with Sanders this spring by bus, plane, and van. Manhattan, Moline, and Davenport, and Muscatine, and Burlington, and Fairfield, and Oskaloosa. It's a hard word to say. Oskaloosa, Iowa, Las Vegas, Washington, Madison, Wisconsin, Gary, Indiana, Coopersville, and Warren, and Detroit, Michigan. Lordstown, Ohio, Pittsburgh, and Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Talk of a rigged system has hardly vanished. But now Sanders focuses on the human toll of a rigged system, rather than just the profiteering and exploitation and lobbying and campaign contributions he is famous for decreeing. As one staffer explained, Sanders is assigning an emotion to the rigging. He is, in this and other ways, learning to be personal. I feel like he did a pretty decent job of that in 2016, but it's not a bad thing if he wants to do it more. That's not a bad thing. From the very beginning, he was always concerned about policy, always concerned about making a meaningful difference. He didn't have time for the niceties. Niceties? Is that a word? I didn't know that was a word. Jane Sanders, the senator's wife and closest advisor, told me, he has over time really become more. He's still very issue oriented, but he's placing focus on the people and the impact that those policies have. The new focus was evident this spring in a less familiar event format for Sanders. Intimate, almost confessional town halls. A panel of 3 or 4 ordinary citizens would share stories of their hardships, and others in the audience would share their own tales, and Sanders would respond with a mix of awkward sympathy, a synthesis of their situation in his stump speech. In the theater of Burlington, Iowa, school one afternoon, 3 panelists, all women, sat on stage with Sanders. The first, Carrie Duncan, spoke of her trouble getting health insurance, not having coverage when she worked in a school cafeteria in a non-union job, getting coverage when she landed a union job in an ammunition plant, and then losing it again because of rising costs. The fat cats continue to grow richer by drinking from the bowls of cream that us little cats get for them, she said. Wow, that's a brilliant metaphor. Good on her. It's time to make the fat cats meow. A nurse practitioner named Teresa Kruger spoke of living with type 1 diabetes and her work caring for patients with that condition, many of whom can't afford insulin, which has surged in price over the recent years. Then came Patty French. I've been married for 26 years and had 3 great kids, she said. We have a great life. We've made lots of memories. Then she told the story of her son. Trevor was into music and politics, and in 2016, he canvassed for Sanders. He also had a pill addiction. He struggled and then got help and got sober and was 7 months clean with his own job and apartment and was proud of himself. Then he felt the surge of anxiety and old demons returning and went to a clinic and got 140 pills and instructions to go see a counselor when the vacancy came up. But he didn't get in before an accidental overdose killed him. We have never been the same, French said. Sanders, turning bright red and somber with emotion, reached out and gave her a few comforting pats. Thanks for the super chat, Ofuentes. Good morning. The audience began to give their testimonies. A woman spoke of death, of mental health care resources, and how she lost 2 of her friends to suicide and seen others struggle to get help, including myself, who I have almost lost many times. A man who works at McDonald's spoke of scraping by on $9 an hour. Holy crap. A man from the steel plant spoke of jobs vanishing to India and the Czech Republic. A woman who grew up on a family farm spoke of crop prices falling and bankruptcies climbing. At these stories and emotions poured in, they landed on the shoulders of a man who is, depending on whom you ask, a person of great empathy or gruff curmudgeon. I think everybody thinks I'm very somber and very angry and very, very serious, Sanders told me in Ohio, which is half true. Faced with these testimonies of struggle, Sanders doesn't usually do what other leaders in our therapeutic culture. He doesn't hug people. He tell them he feels their pain. Ask follow-up questions about how their family is doing. What he does with their pain is analyze it, contextualize it, connect it to laws and agencies and instances of greed that they may not know about, and offer it back to them as steaming righteous evidence-based anger. People tell him of the bill they can't pay that keeps them awake, and he tells them that the chief executive of local insurance companies make however many millions, throwing percentages at them like darts. He gives them statistics that might explain their pain, gives them a thesis to connect the dots in their lives. He teaches them to look at themselves in new ways, systemically. That is very, very true. That is one of the best things about Bernie. He says that there's a lot of individual credit and blame in a capitalist society, Jane Sanders told me. She described Bernie's message in the town halls as, this is not an individual failure, that you're having trouble meeting your bills or that your health has suffered because you can't afford health care. He tries to give them a context that says, hey, stop blaming yourself. Start thinking about how you and the democracy can help change the system. Perfectly put, Bernie. Perfectly put. It is not necessarily our fault that we find ourselves in the financial situations that we have ended up in as a country, but it is on us to start looking for solutions. We can only make so many excuses, right? We can only make so many excuses. We have to take the little bit of democracy we have left and mix that with a little bit of revolution, or whole lot of revolution, I should say, and get down with the get down, as my brother always puts it. So, after a few of these town halls, Sanders' own stoicism makes more sense. He begins to seem almost a secular priest. That's kind of what he is. People come to him with stories of despair, and he lifts their pain up into the air to a place where it is no longer personal, but something civic. He gives them the language and information to know how it isn't their fault. His speeches are like that of that hug in Good Will Hunting. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. The system did this. Big corporations did this. A bought and paid for government did this. He connects their pain to the pain of others. And in the process, that pain is remade, almost transubstantiated into a sweeping case against the corrupt system. The priest, in this metaphor, doesn't reveal himself because his job is to float above his own feelings, his own needs and desire to be liked. His job is to make space for and make sense of and make use of your pain. This covenant with his supporters is his great achievement. No rival for the Democratic nomination has anything like it. There's one. Even Steve Bannon, the right-wing populist who ran Donald Trump's presidential campaign in 2016, admires it. Sanders' agenda is hodgepodge of these half-baked socialist ideas that we've seen haven't worked. Bannon told me in his office of the Upper East Side of Manhattan, sitting in front of a painting on which the words "Follow Your Dreams" were written above a monkey sitting in a Coca-Cola box. But, he said, Bernie has done a tremendous job of galvanizing a segment that hasn't gone away. I mean, he has a real movement. Oh, God. Oh, God. Oh, man, they're going to say that Steve Bannon endorsed Bernie and the smears are going to be nonstop. Why would you put that in the article? Oh, my God. New York Times is going to read that and go crazy. The Daily Beast is going to write more smear articles on him. Oh, my God. Oh, man, I cannot wait for that article. There is guaranteed going to be a Daily Beast hit piece on Bernie because Steve Bannon said that Bernie created a legitimate movement. And it will probably not include anything that Steve Bannon actually said about Bernie and what he thinks of his movement until the very, very end of the article, if even at all. So, with that being said, we're almost done here. Building a following fueled by pain and personal hardship is an especially big accomplishment for a candidate who is himself so emotionally inaccessible, reluctant to share more than the barest glimpses of his own story and inner life. Not me, us. Is his 2020 campaign slogan. Hold on, I thought that was kind of his 2016 too. Come on, you gotta get those facts straight. This article is decent so far. It's not, ain't all that, but it's decent. It's decent enough. And that was definitely his 2016 campaign slogan, and I think it's worth mentioning because it, once again, it resembles the consistency in his message, that it is not about him. It is about everybody. And that is what has galvanized a base that, I mean, for better or for worse, is not going anywhere. almost to a T, what he defines a politician is they love to tell their story. Oh, excuse me. Almost to a T, what he defines a politician is they love to. I think that's a really awkward sentence. Whatever. Shakir told me. He has absolutely zero inclination to do that. He abhors it. Sanders seems to believe that the public doesn't have a right to know him more intimately, even though there's abundant evidence that the essential character traits of our presidents eventually shaped all of our lives. Bill Clinton's appetites. Oh my God. His appetite. I don't know if that's what they really meant. Maybe somebody who was like old enough to remember Bill Clinton in the 90s more so than I am. Maybe they meant something different, but I read appetites as something different. George W. Bush's certitude, Barack Obama's instinct to hire bankers, Donald Trump's narcissism. In our first interview on a bench in Des Moines Airport, I asked Sanders a simple question. How did he first experience the idea that the people blame themselves for systemic problems? Well, before we get to me, he said, what the political revolution about is a million people sticking to stand up. I love it. I love it. Do you remember what they said Bernie Sanders' very first debate? Do y'all remember that first debate? Debate with Lincoln Chafee and others. Martin O'Malley. I remember. They said, Sanders, can you give a little bit about yourself? And you know what Bernie said? Today we are living in the country, one of the richest country in the history of America, and people still cannot afford health. Immediately, didn't say a damn thing about himself. He like, y'all know I'm a old white senator from Vermont, but here's what we need to be talking about. Look, immediately, most Google top. That's why when I say they're going to try their hardest to shut out Bernie Sanders and Tulsi Gabbard. Make no mistake about it. They're going to try to hit them with curveball after curveball after curveball. And guess what? That one message that first message became instantly viral. And that message for him, for Tulsi, if Gravel gets on the stage, for him as well, that is the message that will carry them through this election. They can only suppress you for so long. When that message gets out, it's viral, and it's viral forever. Many of Sanders' advisors are eager for the senator to get more personal. They know they have a good story They know they have a good story to tell. Sanders is, after all, the son of an immigrant, a first-generation college student who grew up in a paycheck-to-paycheck family. He's a Jew who's I don't really like. He's Jewish. I don't know why it sounded so weird. He's a Jew. He's Jewish, and his relatives were murdered. That's because I just try to put like black. Like he's a black. I don't like that. I just feel like it otherizes like people when you say it like that, because he is part of this community and he is Jewish, and his parents just happen to be relatives were murdered in the Holocaust. Campaigning in an era where when the president of the United States has said a group of neo-Nazis were very fine people. He was at the 1963 March on Washington when Dr. Martin Luther King confessed his dream. His aversion to personalizing can be self-defeating. I kind of understand where they're coming from in that regard, where because he doesn't like talking. Only recently has he not talked about being an activist, or has he started talking about being an activist? Something that we were like, a lot of us in 2015, 2016 were like, yo, speak up about this. Hillary's a liar. Hillary was never an activist, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So these pictures were not leaked by like the campaign, the pictures of his activism. The history of Bernie's activism was spread by his supporters because people were basically just trying to decide. I mean, they were trying to not decide, but explain and to themselves and to others, and decide for themselves and to others. Is this guy the real deal? Does he have a history of this? And then when you go back and look at his history was indeed matching up with his rhetoric. These days, Sanders is trying to go there. As I return here to the area where I was born, let me say a few personal words. He said at the March 2nd kickoff of his campaign in Brooklyn, as we launch this campaign for president, you deserve to know where I came from, because family history obviously heavily influenced the values that we develop as adults. He talked for a few moments about his childhood and his parents looking even graver than he usually does, staring at his notes constantly. I know where I came from, he screamed out of nowhere with great feeling. And that is something I will never forget. And I actually believe that Bernie does not talk about his past that often, because I had started talking about my past maybe 6 or 7 months ago. Well, actually a little bit longer than that. Yeah, maybe almost a year ago now. Because it was something that when you have a very, very rough childhood, like my grandmother died of breast cancer very young, when my mother was very young. My mother had a lot of hardship because of that. We faced a lot of hardship because of that as well, because of extenuating circumstances. My grandparents have seen some things. I personally seen some things, and it's when you're having that conversation out loud, it takes a certain level of vulnerability that is developed, through interpersonal relations and things like that. It's not something you can naturally accrue. I still don't talk about a lot of my past, but I do understand how telling my story in my journalism has helped me be more relatable and be more accessible to others who have had similar stories, and have helped them be comfortable to understand that same things. It's not Bernie's fault that his parents were killed in the Holocaust. It's not. But sometimes we feel like if we were there, we could have done something about it, right? I feel like I could have been a better child to my mother, even though I did do well in school eventually. But I caused my mom a lot of, I gave her a lot of gray hair as well. But you realize that it's a system set up to see my mother work 60, 70 hours a week is not my fault as a child. We're just doing the best we can with what we have. But it's still hard for people who are leaders, especially, to project that, because they feel like it makes them seem softer potentially and like less of a capable leader. And of course that's not the case. I think we should be a little bit more vulnerable in telling our stories, because in today's world, that's how we know that what you are advocating for is genuine. So, Bernie Sanders grew up in a cramped, rent-controlled apartment, number 2C, in a 6-story brick building in East 26th Street in the Midwood neighborhood of Brooklyn. He was the son of a paint salesman dad who immigrated from Poland, and a homemaker mom born in New York. He grew up playing punchball in the street, attending Hebrew school on the weekends, poking around Chinese and Jewish eateries on Kings Highway, and running across country at James Madison High. The family wasn't poor, but there wasn't enough not to worry. In one of our interviews, Sanders told me that he and his brother Larry slept on living room sofas for much of their use. The first time I had my own room, I think, was second or third year at the University of Chicago. What? That's crazy. He said in school, young Bernie felt inferior. Baseball gloves other kids got were better gloves, and the sneakers were better sneakers, and the clothing was better. When Sanders thunders, I know what it does to a family to live paycheck to paycheck. He seems to be excavating his own pain. See, this is what I was talking about. It's hard to tell that story because when you start talking about it, it does affect you. It could literally affect your state of mind, your state of being for the entire day. Revisiting moments of pain in your past, and so that's why I think it's admirable that he's even taking these steps, and I think that it's once again something that we all should be addressing, especially men, right? Our masculinity and the image of what masculinity is oftentimes will disallow a lot of us to be vulnerable, and therefore let other people understand that it is okay, that we've all had trials and tribulations, that we do need to talk through them to get better. So it looked like a lot of arguments between my mom and my dad, he told me, virtually always over money. And my mother wanted more than we had, and there was always pressure on my father, and it led to a lot of stress, as it always does. He has written that almost every major household purchase, a bed, a couch, drapes, would be accompanied by a fight between my parents over whether or not we could afford it. In Sanders telling, his father was more content with what we had because he was born into poverty. He was born into poverty in Poland. He knew worse. It was different for Sanders' mother. She was an American, and she said, "Let's do this. I want a home of our own." She longed to leave the rent-controlled apartment where her children slept on a sofa. She died at 46, and her dreams unrealized. Oh, man, that's sad. Wow. Bernie's mom was beautiful. Look at that, people. Look at that. Beautiful family. Old Bernie man. Handsome Bernie. Wow. It's kind of crazy to think that Bernie hasn't really been old his whole life. I for sure thought he was. Jane Sanders was more willing than Bernie to talk about that death. See, once again, it's a consistent theme. I'm telling you, it's so difficult. And I'm speaking, this is from a personal, it's just so difficult. And sometimes it's easier for other people to tell a story for you. He was 19 when his mother died. Oh, God. And his father died right after that, a year later. Both of his parents died young. Oh, my. No wonder the man is so hardened. His brother moved to England. Given her husband's lack of enthusiasm for discussing his past, Jane can be forgiven for these details being just slightly off. He lost his father 2 years after his mother. His brother moved to England after Bernie finished college. He was alone in the world. It's so true. Oh my God, man, that's a lot. He was alone in the world, I think that is a very strong impact. He doesn't need other people's approval. And he's used to being an independent because of all of that. As an origin story, it offers another way to look at Senator Sanders' record as the longest serving independent congressional history. And I agree. It's almost like a point of pride at this point for Bernie to be independent. So, that's dope. And so he's alone, right? Jen continued. Think about that. He's alone in the world. He's at University of Chicago. He's spending most of the time in the stacks rather than in class, reading about everything. Among the books Sanders found were those of Debs, a socialist leader, about whom he would later make a documentary. It was at this time, orphaned and at a distance from his brother, who had introduced Bernie to serious reading, and he has written, "Opened my eyes to a world of ideas that I otherwise would never have seen." That the future senator became interested in civil rights. He joined the campus chapter of the Congress of Racial Equality and helped lead a sit-in against the university administrators for discriminating against black students in off-campus housing. He became so consumed by activism that a dean, seeing his lowest grades, suggested he take time off. He's not a partier, Jane said. No drugs and no alcohol. He was not into that. So that college experience at that particular moment in his life, I think, really formed the foundation of his life's work. I asked Jane if she thought her husband had ever processed the string of losses. I don't think he bothered to process it at the time. Once again, what we were just talking about. I think that they both escaped it. Later on, she said, both brothers grappled with the pain and meaning of their parents' lives, assisted by a 2013 trip they took to Poland with their wives. That's interesting. I wonder if that trip had anything to do with Bernie deciding to run. Like finally reconciling with, being with his brother, reconciling the pain that he had that came from his family, understanding their story and how they got here, and wanting to leave that mark. I think that might have had something to do with Bernie deciding, you know what, I'm better at this than damn near anybody else, especially at that time. Why not? So the article goes on to say that They asked Jane whether Bernie's early pursuit of justice could be seen as a way of coping with loss. I don't know, she said. I think at that point in our lives, no matter who we are, we're searching for ourselves. And if our entire family at the same time is gone, you have nothing to lean on. So I think the search becomes more important and more dramatic. Deserted at that time by love, warm, messy, emotional individual, Sanders found justice. Cool, systemic, analytical, collective. A justice he now seeks for all of us. In that Ohio hotel, Sanders repeated his mantra about personal life being unimportant. I don't talk about myself all the time. I get criticized for that. But you know, you're learning to do it a little more. I cut in. I'm learning to do it a little bit. All right. The interview was over. Oh, man. Man, it's a beautiful family. Is that Levy? Levy got that almost the same haircut. Levy, man, I'm going to take you to my barber. We got to get you a different haircut. That's almost the exact same haircut. The I-94 primary. America blurs by Maggiano, Fairfield Inn, Maggiano's, AMC Cannon, Courtyard Inn, Applebee's, adult toy stores, tractors the size of Sanders' boyhood apartment, and homes tucked behind woods with a lone floodlight bearing witness over the garage. The message of Bernie 2020 Midwest Battleground States tour was not subtle. The campaign wants to prove it can recapture the state's former Secretary Hillary Clinton lost to in 2016. One of those states is Michigan, and within Michigan, Macomb County is the kind of place Sanders thinks he needs to win. Macomb is a county that made Reagan Democrats famous. It is 80% white, full of the non-college educated white working class voters, the Diamond Medallion priority pass members of American politics. And so on that April afternoon in Warren, Sanders made his case to a county that had voted for JFK, Ronald Reagan, George W. Bush only once, Barack Obama, and Donald Trump. Man, that county is really open to hearing new ideas over and over and over again. All right. He began by listing states that Trump won. We're here today to say that mistake is not going to be repeated in 2020, he shouted. The word mistake was the crux of the pitch. In his retelling, Trump ceased to be a demagogue who campaigned on bigotry, jingoism, and any appeal of those ideas among Macomb voters remain unexplored. When he was running for president, Sanders said the very biggest lie that he told here in Michigan and in Vermont and all over the country is that he was going to stand with the working class people of this nation. That was the biggest lie he told. I 100% agree. In this rendering, Trump is a president whose sin is having pretended to be Bernie Sanders while turning out to be Paul Ryan. Perhaps this is what victory in Macomb and Macomb-like places demands, a redacted retelling of 2016, so a candidate can indict Trump without indicting anyone who voted for him. Earlier in the tour, in Madison, Wisconsin, Sanders had been even more explicit. I can understand why people voted for Trump based on what he said, Sanders told the crowd. There's a lot of pain out there. He said this even though there is now good evidence that voting for Trump was more associated with the desire to stay on top than suffering at the bottom. That's a pretty... I'm not saying that there aren't people who had a desire to stay on top. I'm not saying that at all. But there was a lot of people looking to break out from the boot that the establishment had put them under. They felt that Trump was a vehicle to make that happen. And that's from... I've been on the ground. That's a fact. Later in Pittsburgh, Sanders would declare, "Hey, Mr. Trump, you're not like you say you are," which is both truth and seemingly in denial of all the ways that the president totally what he said he'd be. With Trump in the White House, Democrats can't ignore Macomb, but there are other votes that need to be courted. Minorities and women, and black women, and especially, are the lifeblood of the modern Democratic Party, and for them, Sanders' way of diluting the truth about Trump. It's not diluting the truth about Trump to give the overarching theme. Understand something. Sanders is not like Sanders is MLK. when it comes to black issues, okay? Nor is he claiming to be that. But let's not pretend that, like, racism, the reality of racism, if we're going to talk about the racism coming from Trump, and I love that segment with Nina Turner on CNN, probably won't have her on. They said, she said, let's stop pretending that the only racism and bigotry we see comes from Donald Trump and the Republicans. Let's stop pretending that's the case, because it is absolutely not. It comes from her, she said, her colleagues in the Democratic Party as well. And the fact that they will not put a mirror up to themselves and say, we need to address this and address our supporters and engage our supporters with this reality of racism that is experienced in the Democratic Party. Like, for example, I was in the California Democratic Convention this weekend. It was rah-rah black women, you know, when they first thought Kamala would be the show out, and it turned out to not be the case. We love black women, black women, black women, black women. Who are you voting for? Kimberly Ellis, who is the Bernie Crat running for the California Democratic chair, or Rusty Hicks, which is almost a caricature of a name of exactly what you think he would look like. Halfway balding, seemingly from male pattern baldness, boring as all get out, pretends to be with the working class, tries to embody that moniker that his name kind of like sounds like, the Rusty Hicks kind of a guy. Like, and guess what those people were voting for? They voted for Rusty Hicks and not the black woman. Guess what the party advocated for? Rusty Hicks and not the black woman. Guess who the other minority in the race threw their votes to without any complaints from the establishment? Rusty Hicks, Rusty Hicks, Rusty Hicks, Rusty freaking Hicks, rather than the black woman, Kimberly Ellis. So to pretend, and I think that a lot of people in the Democratic Party understand this. And that's why that line, I mean, like, is it really diluting the truth about Trump voters, or explaining that the majority of Trump voters, the majority, I truly believe this, they see him more so as an establishment outsider. Now, that does not mean that there are not some Trump voters who voted for him out of pure ignorance, racism, and hatred. But we cannot pretend or make that out to be the dominant reason, because it doesn't address the systemic realities that allowed Trump to get to his position to begin with. At the very bare minimum, it is absolutely not a winning strategy. If you think that people will not turn out for Bernie Sanders in 2020 in a general election, you've lost your mind. You have lost it. Bernie would smack Trump. He would beat Trump into a dirt. I mean, Trump would probably start avoiding debates. I feel that way about Bernie. I feel that way about Tulsi. And I feel that way about Mike Gravel. I feel like all of them would just obliterate Trump in debates. The dilemma came to a head an hour later. We got off his bus at Detroit's Sweet Potato Sensations, a bakery famous for its sweet potatoes. Okay, I'm not going to go into that. There we go. This is good. All right. So it says that African-American woman, Sanders stood up among them and took questions. A woman named Janice Hazel Rose. She said she used to work for Representative John Conyers, a long-serving former House member from Michigan. Conyers was actually one of the ones who originally crafted Medicare for All. His bill, as a separate note, is considered the standard for Medicare for All. And he had long proposed a bill mandating a commission to study how reparations for descendants of slaves might be undertaken in the U.S. Hazel asked Sanders whether or not he backed the idea, which Conyers had reintroduced each session until he resigned in 2017 over allegations of sexual harassment. Before she could finish, Sanders cut her off, undermining the proposal by reminding people that it is merely for a study. She tried to complete the question, and again Sanders jumped in. Well, I've said that in Congress passes the bill, I will sign it. It is a study, he pivoted. You know Jim Clyburn from South Carolina? Clyburn has a bill which I like. It's called 10-20-30. The plan calls for 10% of all funds from certain federal programs to go to distressed community and build those communities. And so this was what I was referring to earlier. This is a legitimate critique of Bernie. Remember I said I wish that sometimes he would listen and ask, and just say, I'm willing to sit down, because it does say a study. So I'm willing to sit down and make every step of the way, be as open-minded and transparent as possible, and let the people who have undergone the most backlash from systemically racist policies come up with the solutions and see if they can work. No, matter of fact, do whatever I can to make them work. That would have been the appropriate way to handle that situation. That is one of his blind spots. When he gets in a situation where he's kind of uncomfortable because he knows his answer necessarily isn't 100% right. He feels like he has to answer. Like he has to give a solution. He has to come up with an alternative. And sometimes it's just important to just sit back and say, hey man, I don't got the right answer, but I can get it for you. It's okay too. That's what a leader does. They put smarter people around them, put people smarter than them around them. After Hazel told me she felt Sanders avoided her question, as it is, he had only recently come around to this tepid support for studying reparations, and that's true. And his irritation at being pinned down on the issue is revealing. Remember, talked about that too. The dismissal of a mere study suggested an unfamiliarity with what advocates for reparations seek. What advocates for reparations seek. A program so sweeping that it would be impossible to administer without years of forethought. I don't think so. I don't think it would be impossible. In fact, I'm pretty sure people have outlined just how possible it is. The interaction also called into question Sanders' ability to navigate the complex social terrain that is the Democratic electorate in 2019. A room full of black women who didn't seem bought into the Sanders agenda were trying to figure out, as all voters are, if he got them. There were 1,000 ways in that moment to say, yes, I back reparations, or even, no, I don't, and here's why, and still convey your grasp of what lay beneath the question, the desire to be seen and reassured that your community won't be forgotten. Sanders didn't do that. And that's a true statement, honestly. That is one of the things that I think that he can improve on. And that's not true. That is a legitimate point made by the author, and it has been a legitimate point made by other minority Sanders supporters, and I think that it should be addressed. That reassurance, that understanding that we are not looking for you to make the answers for us necessarily, but for you to understand that we have to be included in that decision. You cannot unilaterally make it for us. You know what I mean? Like, you can't unilaterally control the conversation and the outcome for us. The Democrat who emerges to take on Trump in 2020 will have to compete for those Reagan Democrats and those black women. Two tribes living in different worlds, a short distance apart from the I-94. An issue like reparations is a perfect example of how difficult this can be. Pleasing Detroit may hurt you a few exits to the north. But I will say this. Bernie has a very unique ability. Bernie has a unique ability to take issues that were unpopular, take positions that were unpopular, and make and have very low approval ratings, and make them mainstream. He's done it with women's rights in that conversation. He's done it with, anti-war rhetoric. He's done it with his advocacy of the Muslim community as it was wrongfully demonized over the last 4 to 5 years. So he's made it a more comfortable conversation to have. So Bernie has that ability, and that is what I think he needs to use, is his ability to educate people. Like what he was talking about earlier. Take the pain, analyze it, explain to them systemically how they've been held back. But when it comes to minorities, when it comes to women even, or when it comes to, just sit back and say, hey, I preside over the country. I don't unilaterally make decisions for it. And so I want you to be a big part of that decision making so that we can figure this out together. And these are facts. So it's called It is being called the woke primary by people on the Republican side because of the early pressure on candidates to take positions on questions of race and gender and identity. Questions that matter to people other than white working class men. The high maternal mortality rate for black women, transgender rights, the question of when physical contact between men and women escalates from friendly to predatory, the problem of combating hate crimes. The woke primary is a challenge for Sanders, in part because he's an old-style leftist whose overriding lens is class, not identity. And the overriding lens, by the way, should be class. But you cannot codify that correctly without understanding how identity is used to weaponize people against each other in class warfare. In other words, I can't solve a problem. I can't solve a calculus problem missing a piece without addressing a piece of that equation. You have to break down the equation and solve it piece by piece to get to the end of your very complex calculus problem. A problem that I would not be able to solve today, so don't ask me. Barely was able to solve when I was 19. In part because woke culture often craves the kind of gesture making to which he's allergic. Hey, I'm allergic to it too, Bernie. I completely agree. And in part because Sanders seems to struggle with the expectation that a 77-year-old white guy needs to learn, evolve, and prove that he gets it, even if he was at Dr. Martin Luther King's march. The 2016 campaign left a residue of doubt about Sanders' ability to navigate on both ends of I-94. I don't think so. I don't believe so at all. Bernie, Michigan through and through. I mean, they love this man, so I don't really believe that. But hey, people say what they want to say, even if facts disagree. Critics complain that his signature campaign advertisement set to Simon and Garfunkel's America featured overwhelmingly white faces. His campaign leadership was too white, too male. That part was true, but there is context behind that. Most of his staff, nobody wanted to work with him in the beginning. He had to go with the people who were around him, who in Vermont are going to be dominantly white. Okay? I mean, these are just facts. But I think it's important to say as well that remember that the black leadership had been basically coaxed into being Clinton or nobody and smacking down anybody who argued against Clinton. So it wasn't like they were running to the Sanders campaign. I was one of the very few black faces in the beginning that publicly gravitated towards Bernie's campaign. To be in a part of leadership positions. It was very rare. Everybody else was telling me, well, why aren't you go with Hillary? I used to get in fights in my college courses all the time with Hillary supporters in my classes about black history and things like that. So, yeah. There was a time in 2015 when Black Lives Matter activists, unsatisfied with Sanders' responses to the problem of police violence in African American communities, interrupted a town hall at which he was speaking. Shall I continue or shall I leave? Sanders asked. I spent 50 years of my life working for civil rights and for dignity, Sanders added, turning towards protesters. But if you don't want me to be here, that is okay. But you know what? It needs to be understood that Bernie gave them the mic. If it's the protest, something, Bernie gave them the microphone and let those women speak. He may not have been happy about it, but that makes it even more admirable, in my opinion, because when your integrity and your convictions supersede how happy you are to do something, it means that he really is on the right side and that he's going to try to do what he can in most cases, despite what his ego might be telling him to. And he handled that very well. Especially compared to how other candidates handled it, if you recall. Like, I don't know, Trump getting people thrown out, or Hillary getting people thrown out. The Sanders campaign is adamant about two things. First, the notion that Sanders has a black problem or a woman problem is made up, a narrative pushed by the Clinton campaign in 2016. From the perspective of mainstream media, abso-fucking-lutely, it is made up. It is very much so made up from their perspective. But women loved Bernie. Women loved Bernie. Women still love Bernie. So, the problems were manufactured by the mainstream. The campaign says that Sanders actually does well among young voters of all groups. His support weakens as people climb up in age. No, not a surprise there. And second, yes, there were real problems that weren't a planted narrative. There were real problems that weren't a planted Clinton narrative, and they are working hard to solve them. Every major team on Sanders' 2020 campaign now has women in leadership roles. The campaign claims a majority of its national leadership team is female. Shakir is the first Muslim American boss of a major U.S. presidential campaign. In response to sexual harassment complaints in 2016, the campaign announced a slate of measures and published details guidelines to curb such behavior. Now, I will say this. If you've noticed something, there's one consistent theme that is never discussed here. And this is Bernie's actual problem, if there is a real problem for him to have. He does have a black man problem. Black women and women of color specifically, mostly women of color, not necessarily black women, are in leadership slates all across the country and all across its campaign. Black men, in large part, are not. Black men do not have a seat at the table, right? So yes, Killer Mike is advocating for Bernie. Cornel West is advocating for Bernie. But black men do not have a say in his messaging. They do not have a say in his understanding of electoral politics. They do not have any influence on how he deals with or does not deal with the situation. And that is a problem. If he did have a problem. And even in this article, if you've noticed, black men have been completely erased from the discussion. And oftentimes, they are when it comes to discussing Bernie Sanders. Whether it's intentional or accidental, it's something that needs to be dealt with nonetheless. Black women have been uplifted by Bernie in many, many ways. In my opinion, he's never really had a unique black women problem. In fact, he's been one of the best at uplifting black women and women of color in general since his last campaign. But the black men have had a lot of issue with that, with just being erased, basically. And it's something that's been a consistent theme in this article as well. So the article does. I'm gonna conclude here, because we've gotten the basic gist of it. It's basically talking about his achievements and all that good stuff. But I did a decent job addressing and codifying Sanders 2016 compared to Sanders 2020. Learned a lot of interesting facts about Bernie in this article. It does humanize him. I think it addresses some critiques in legitimately when dealing with minorities. They probably only came out because they put a hyper-focused lens on Bernie so that there was almost nothing he could do in the moment on his feet to not mess up and have it used against him. Seeing if he can overcome and break through the history of activists not really being elected to being the president. The closest that we've gotten is vice president, and I believe that would be Henry Wallace. So we'd love to know what you thought and what you think about this article. Leave a like the video. Have a conversation about it in the comment section. You see on Twitter, this is probably gonna be something talked about a lot on Twitter. But I think the issues brought up at the very bare minimum in this article deserve to be discussed, deserve to be debated, deserve to be engaged. And because Sanders, his staff will read these discussions. And it is something that will help him ultimately. And if Sanders is ultimately helped, then all of us benefit from it. So with that being said, people, thank you all so much for tuning into this live stream segment of Mi Casa es Su Casa. Make sure you like the video, make sure you share it, make sure you're still subscribed as well, and always remember, more than anything else, find your balance. Peace. Make sure you follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, on Roku TV, and on JustNForm.com. Also, you can make sure that you're subscribed to the channel by going to the subscribe button, pressing it, and hitting that notification bell to get all of our notifications. And of course, you can help us reach our goal of 500 patrons on Patreon by supporting the show by donating as little as $1. You can click on the link in the description below for that. And remember, more than anything else, find your balance. Peace.